I actually feel rather pleased to be speaking here today because I've spoken a lot about the Monographs and Open Access project that I'm going to be telling you about today. But we're now reaching a point where the report is being drafted and we're heading towards some conclusion. And it's rather nice to be giving you, as I will do, the first look at the structure of the report, though obviously not its detailed conclusions. So let me explain why the Monographs and Open Access project was set up. Some of you will know a lot about it, others will know less. So I want to explain the background and explain the process, and then give you a look at the structure of what the report will look like and the kind of issues that I'm going to be addressing in it. Why was it set up by HEFCE a little over a year ago? The aim of this was not to be the equivalent of Finch. We're at a much earlier stage of thinking about the way in which open access might relate to monographs. And of course, as you know, it's not about REF 2020 because HEFCE and the Funding Council, all four funding councils, have made it quite clear that monographs will not be expected to be in open access for 2020. Indeed, nothing but journal articles and referee conference proceedings will be. But in 10 years' time, it's clear that there will be a lot of monographs available online, far more than there are now. And by then, open access will obviously be a difficult issue to resist when monographs are increasingly digitally available. Therefore, the aim of the project was not to come up with Finch-style recommendations, but to identify and clarify the issues, to move forward thinking, but not to offer formal policy recommendations, though I shall have quite a lot to say about the policy context in what I say in the report. The AHRC and ESRC both gave support to the project, and the British Academy is also on the steering group. Let me stress that monographs, and the term I'm going to be using right the way through is monographs, it's a shorthand for research-based books. There was a suggestion from HEFCE that we call it a project on long-form research publication, and I refuse to take on the role of head of such a project. So it's the Monographs and Open Access project, but it includes books of research essays by different people, it includes scholarly editions, and so on. The Monographs and Open Access project, why the ampersand? Well, when I was asked if I was interested in taking this on by HEFCE, I insisted that this wasn't simply about the practicalities or even the principles of open access. We had to start with why monographs matter and what's happening to them, before we could begin to understand some of the complex problems involved in open access of monographs. And therefore, the project I proposed to HEFCE, and which they readily accepted, has three dimensions. The first is to ask what is the culture of the monograph within the arts, humanities and social sciences, within the ecology of scholarly communication in different disciplines. What's the role of the monograph? There is variation across humanities and social science disciplines. And some research books, of course, exist that aren't formal monographs, and they're very important in some disciplines. Scholarly editions are very important in classics and literature, exhibition catalogues in art history, and so on. So where does it sit within the ecology of scholarly publications is the first, scholarly communications, the first issue. But the second is also to understand the culture of the monograph in more complex ways, and that's been fundamental to the work, and it will be a central theme of the report. The role of the monograph, the role of the research book in the way that knowledge is developed, articulated, and disseminated. The role of long book-length development of an argument that plays out over 250, 300 pages with evidence deployed within it. And also something that's become very prominent as we've been talking to people talking to academics about it. And that is, and I should have been reminded of it myself as a historian, the notion of thinking through writing the book. The fact that whereas an article on the whole will be fully formed in the author's mind before they lay it out, when it comes to a book, you actually develop your argument and your ideas and your analysis through the process of writing and structuring the book. All of that means that the culture is actually quite special. It also helps explain why individual scholars identify with their own work and their own books in a powerful way. One doesn't hear people often talking about my article. You do hear arts, humanities, social science scholars talking about my book. And that sense of ownership is very important. That sense of a personal voice that is articulated through a long project is important and helps explain the culture. And of course, that does partly explain, but not entirely, the role in reputation and career progression, especially promotion of the monograph. And whether career progression actually depends on monographs. And it's a patchy picture, but it clearly is one that exists. I'll come back to that. So what we see is the continuing strength of the culture of the monograph across much of the arts, humanities and social sciences, and the reasons why. The second question I wanted to ask is there a crisis of the monograph? Well, one thing that has clearly emerged is that rather like the decline of rural England, there has always been a crisis of the monograph. But certainly you can track back discussions of the crisis of the monograph to the 1980s, and you can probably go further back if you want to. There are lots of myths about the crisis of the monograph. Print run numbers, 2,000 at some point in the past and 200 today. There's no way of finding out where these figures come from except that they keep being repeated. So we tried to actually get away from the myths and ask some fundamental questions. Has there been a decline in the number of monographs published? Well, no, there hasn't. On the contrary. Work we've done, we've worked with the 4 largest UK monograph publishers to look at the number of books, of monographs that they have published over the last 10 years. And for those 4, it has doubled from about 2,500 to 5,000 over the last 10 years. Some different patterns across disciplines, but it has doubled. There is not, therefore, a decline, at least from those, as far as that evidence is concerned, in the numbers published. Is it harder to get published in some sub-areas than others? Yes. But is that new? Has it always been difficult to get published in some sub-areas of disciplines? Has there been a decline in the number of each book purchased? And I think that does appear clearly to be the case. As far as libraries are concerned, we need to probe the reasons for that, and you'll know much better than me about your purchasing practices. But one thing that's emerged quite prominently is that obviously budget pressures for libraries caused by the cost of science journals is a very important element in an apparent decline in the purchase of monographs by libraries. But we've also encountered real librarian concern over the level of demonstrable demand for all the monographs that they purchase. And there are all the stories around about the numbers that never get read, never get taken out, and so on. And I think that I get the impression that university librarians are more confident that their science journals are being used than they are confident that all the monographs they buy are being used. And that's something I think we need to recognise. The third background element to all of this takes us on then to open access. How will innovation and publishing and access models affect the monograph in the context of those first 2 questions about culture and crisis? What are the implications of a move towards online and open access for monographs? And how can the strength of the print monograph be sustained in a new world of digital open access, if and when that appears? That's one of the big questions that we're asking in the report, alongside asking whether the monograph could be enhanced through online delivery and through open access. That is, it's not just the question of access that matters, but also the dynamics of how it's used. Will monographs through open access be as interlinked, as semantic, and as accessible as everything else on the web? Central to all of that are the business models for open access monograph publishing. There are many ideas and pilots around, you know as well as I do, and it's my doubt that any single model will emerge as dominant, unlike what appears to have broadly happened in journals. To help us, we asked London Economics to do some work analysing the main business models for open access monographs, and I'll come back to that again later. So those are the 3 big questions. How have we set about our work? We set up an expert reference group to discuss and advise. It's very broadly based. We've had 4 long meetings, and indeed that expert reference group currently has a late draft of the report for their comments. The reference group contains academics, print publishers, open access publishers, research funders, and librarians. And I'm pleased to say that actually all 3 of the librarians, I think all 3 of the librarians who are on the panel, David Prosser, Caroline Brazier, and Claire Pound, are actually here today. It will not be the expert reference group's report, it will be my report. And the reason for that is because I want the report to be able to outline clearly some of the differences of opinion. If you want a committee to produce a report, it will become consensual, it'll approach it through finding agreement, and actually the role of this report is to expose the differences of opinion and the possibilities, and therefore, not for reasons of vanity, or not primarily for reasons of vanity, I insisted it be my report. We're now at a late stage of of drafting. It's quite a long report. It's going to be about 60 or 70 pages long. The plan is for a January launch. It will be ready before Christmas, but HEFCE take a while to copy edit and publish things and so on. And so we don't want to get caught up in Christmas. There'll be plans for a January launch. We also have, in addition to the expert reference group, we have international experts who have been advising us. We've been collecting data and advice, including from libraries and publishers. RLUK and SCONL have both done their best to help. I mean, I didn't mean that genuinely, but the data available is not very readily usable, not for our purposes in defining the kind of books we're interested in. The OAPN survey of academic opinion and practice, which took place in the summer, has produced a lot of valuable information for us because we got it to ask some questions that we were particularly interested in, not just about monographs, but about people's use of them. We've been talking to disciplines where third-party rights are an important issue, and more about that later. We've organised focus groups of senior academic managers to talk about appointments and promotions, and of early career researchers to talk about how they see their own careers developing and the place of publication within it. And we've commissioned research on various areas, including the London Economics work on business models that I've referred to. That then is the project. What will be covered in it? And here is the structure of the report. I'm going to say more about the third and fourth sections because they are obviously the meat of it. But I want to make a comment on the last section on policy implications. These are not recommendations for how to establish or mandate open access for research books. They are not policy recommendations for how to do it. They are, in that sense, quite different from the Finch report. They're my conclusions about what needs to be taken into account by those wanting to formulate those policies, and the kind of preparatory and continuing work that policymakers, whoever they are, funding councils, research councils, possibly government, might do to help that process. So that's the character of what might be seen as recommendations. They're not, they're summaries of policy implications. But let me now turn to those two core sections. The one on the current status and position of the monograph, and the other one on open access monographs, opportunities and challenges. First of all, the current status and position of the monographs, and these are the sections of it. There's a section on the importance of writing monographs, which I've already referred to some of the themes of that, the culture of the monograph within certain disciplines. There's a section on the place of the monograph in individual careers, where the mantra of needing a monograph for appointment and promotion has to be nuanced for the UK position. Certainly in comparison with the United States position, where it is simply the credential role of the monograph is absolutely fundamental and inescapable. The evidence that we got from talking to people who've chaired promotion panels, but also looking at some data about promotions confidentially supplied to me, does suggest that there's not although the monograph remains very important, it is not so totally dominant as it is in the United States. But it still has a powerful reputational role to play, and certainly early career researchers told us that without a book, they didn't feel their careers were likely to develop in the way they wanted them to. There's a section on trends in monograph supply and readership, where the report looks in more detail about what can be said about publication rates and about purchasing and readership. There's a section on assuring and demonstrating quality. That's an interesting one because, sorry, they're all interesting, but I'm dwelling on this for a moment. Peer review is thought to be an absolutely key issue. It is a key issue for academic reputation and quality. Pre-publication peer review. What is interesting and what has emerged in the course of this work is that there is less confidence in the current peer review processes for monographs than there are for journal articles, at least in good quality journals. I find that very interesting. Quite simply, the fact that even good publishers are contracting to take on a book on the basis of a synopsis and a sample chapter, that it's very hard to find, even when they have got submissions of full manuscripts as a basis of contract, very hard now to find academics willing to do the peer review for it. And therefore, a sense that the peer review, that a monograph being published is not as secure as a demonstration of quality as we might think it was. Well, one of the issues one needs to raise, therefore, is whether peer review might be different in an open access world, and that's something that we reflect upon. And finally in this section, the print monograph, where print does not reign alone. That is about the materiality of the book, that there's content in a book that's other than text, issues of layout, quality of images, all these different elements that make a book different from simply the words on the page. And that means that the fact of digital access is distinctive for monographs in comparison with journal articles. All of that means that the material quality of what is available through open access is much more important than articles. I do suggest that under current arrangements, simply depositing the author's accepted manuscript for a book in the way one can for an article would not prove, except in general terms, will not actually constitute effective open access of the kind that one wishes to achieve. So there's a real challenge for acceptability, and e-book systems are not yet there in presenting the materiality of the book in a digital context that is satisfactory. There are, on the other hand, also real limitations of print books, of course. The biggest limitation is access. There's a limitation of cost and price, and also, more interestingly, the fixed physical form of the book and the difficulty of enriching through digital engagement when you have a fixed physical object. And that then is the point of transition to open access monographs, which is the other core section of the report, the opportunities and challenges that it offers. The opportunities of open access, the section on that, sets up some of the clear benefits before we head into the many challenges. Benefits of access to research, and that's really important. If books are not available in open access form in due course, and journal articles are, then will one of the most important formats for the distribution, the articulation and distribution of research, become much less important, the monograph. And therefore it becomes very necessary for them to be available in open access if they're to be protected. There's the enhanced functionality of open access, or at least of digital open access, the digital dimension of it. The fact that digital resources, film and data and so on, engagement with readers in interactions and all of that are possible in the digital domain. And one other great advantage, which is that there is a practice now of purchasing individual chapters from a monograph online. If that grows, the book starts disappearing other than as a collection of discrete chapters. And all the arguments about the intellectual project of the book and its importance get lost. So in fact, it could well be that without open access, the monograph is more likely to die for a lot of reasons, one of them being the fact that people can purchase individual chapters, just the ones that they want at the moment. So those are some of the opportunities. There's a section on technical and process challenges, the many technological and process aspects of open access digital monographs, versioning, discoverability, metadata, location, and especially long-term storage. There's a major section inevitably on open licensing and permissions to use and reuse. This is often the most divisive issue, even on our own always constructive expert reference group, as those here will testify. Creative Commons licenses are, of course, the established approach, and there are some advocates of open access who see it as solely defined by the most permissive CC BY license, while other anxious voices see the need for restrictive CC by NC and D licenses, and there's a lot of debate about that going on. We seek to clarify some of the thinking around these issues, as well as implications of seeing open access as an all or nothing process. And one point that I'm making that I will share with you is that it seems to me that if we insist that open access monographs have to be available through the most permissive license, we will lose the support of a massive proportion of the academic community. And I should be arguing that allowing for more restrictive licenses and reassuring people through that might lead us in the longer term to getting wider acceptance of more permissive licenses. There's a major section on third-party rights, which has become for me one of the big issues of the report. There are many disciplines where third-party rights are especially important. Using material in books where others own the rights to the original or to the image, in art history, in music, in dance, in drama, in literature, in film, and in other areas as well. The question has to be, will the rights be as readily given and on the same cost basis if there's free, open circulation? And this has become ever more important as I've thought about it, and I'm presenting it as a very major challenge. Most rights holders, and they have different attitudes to it, to the money they tend to make out of their rights. But most rights holders set the price for the right to use their material on the basis of the circulation of the publication. What happens when 6 billion people could, in theory, access it? And we have no idea at the moment as to what rights holders will do in their charging basis. There's a section on other stakeholders, universities, libraries, and publishers. And there I try to draw together the key stakeholders who recur through the report, universities, libraries, and publishers. I just want to focus for a moment on the first two of those. There are different ways in which the university is involved in shaping the environment and the future for open access monographs. There's obviously the role of university libraries in some models for open access and for some university presses. And the library more generally is being offered as a disseminator and curator of an institution's intellectual output. All of that is going to be very important, therefore, for the way models of open access develop. And, of course, existing models are central. The libraries are central in some existing models to the way open access works are discovered and disseminated. Indeed, I think they will be that whatever the business model. For universities more generally, there's the whole issue of meeting publication costs, whether through book publication charges through that model or through subsidising university presses by another model. And that leads us in to the challenge of universities' management making decisions about open access publication. It's a challenge already for journal publication, but if we had author-side payment for monograph publication, and we're operating in disciplines where Research Council grants are only 20% of the total research funding, with the 80% coming in through the block grant, how will universities make decisions about how to spend what money they allocate for author-side payment? As a former Vice-Chancellor, I suspect I speak for all Vice-Chancellors, it is the last thing that university senior management wants to be involved in doing. In trespassing on what might be seen, and the freedom, and I think is the freedom of academics to publish in good quality places of their choice. There's the international dimension. There's clear international momentum towards open access in general, mostly about journal articles, and there's clearly no uniformity on policies and mandates. The question is, can the UK go it alone on open access monographs any more than it is trying to on journal articles? There are real implications for practice and therefore for any future mandates of the wider international context. For a start, it's clear that there is a range of legal and jurisdictional positions, that CC licenses are not interpreted in the same way by courts in different jurisdictions, and that has a real effect on some international uniformity, even using CC licenses. And the fact that the USA is the biggest external player in terms of research publications and is moving, I think it's not at a different speed, but rather differential speeds in different aspects of the system in the United States, That has real implications for UK policy as well. So there's a major section on the international challenges and pointing out some of the real dangers of not moving in harmony with other countries, though it doesn't deny the fact that the UK could play a lead in this. And finally, before I draw to a close, economic and business models. We have London Economics has tested some distinct models for us against key criteria. There are various models for open access monographs have been proposed. Some are being piloted, and it's far too early to know which might prove viable. In my view, it's improbable that a single model will emerge. There will, I think, be a mixed economy, and it may be that, and I think it probably is, that some of the models that will emerge have not yet been developed or even invented. This will provide a challenge for policymakers shaping mandates if they wish to allow the variety of models to be available. Indeed, I think it'd be quite difficult to deliver open access monographs without allowing a variety of models. London Economics undertook for us a valuable economic analysis of the different current models, and their long analysis, it's about a 40-page document, will be an annex to the published report. They identified 5 models, which I list on there: the traditional publisher, new university press, open access, freemium open access, mission-oriented open access, aggregator distributor model, and author payment model, recognizing actually that there are some models which spread over more than one of those categories. And they tested them against individual criteria on the basis simply of an economic analysis, rather than, there isn't the data out there at the moment that can be crunched for this. But they thought through the issues from an economic perspective on quality of research published and the factors underlying that, sustainability, publishers' financial sustainability, and how you ensure the long-term access to the books, dissemination to larger audiences and to new ones. One of the great dangers of open access is that it can actually make available less good books than are available that aren't in open access. And we need to make sure that a version of Gresham's law in the 16th century, by which bad money drove out good, does not reproduce itself in monographs. They do have to be very well discoverable and disseminated. And they tested them against the criteria about the overall system, the diversity of the system that different models would feed into, of authors and readers, of formats, service levels, and so on. Innovation, the ability of different models to enlarge the possibilities of publishing to the benefits of users and research, and the integrity of the system, the ability of those models to be credible, to maintain standards. It's a complex and nuanced analysis that I think will be very helpful as a contribution to policymakers' thinking. Finally, 2 concluding points. Is open access a disruptive force in a stable system? I'm the kind of historian who's always wary about supposed importance of transforming conjunctural events, and I like to look to longer-term structural changes that are underway. I don't believe that open access should be seen as something that is totally disrupting a stable system. The system of scholarly communication is already being disrupted by major changes and has been long before open access became a serious issue. The character of monograph publishing and its profitability, library financial pressures and acquisition strategies, the globalization and market competition of higher education, research assessment and impact, digital technologies, new forms of research communication, online discoverability, new forms of reading, user expectations of fast location and retrieval of content. All of these have been going on in a world before and during the arrival of the idea of open access. So open access should not be seen as a force disrupting a stable system. It's instead an issue that arises in the context of that disruption and embedded within it. And my final point is to remind you of the objectives of this project. It's to move forward our understanding and our debate in this area, to inform the funding councils and the research councils on the issues and the challenges, to advise on the issues and the next steps. It's not to produce recommendations for implementation. So nothing will arrive on the Minister for Higher Education and Research's desk, which he can place his imprimatur on, as David Willits did. In that sense, it's the necessary successor to the Finch report, but it's not its equivalent. Thank you.